Okay, yesterday I had you try this um, little jersey combination thing, and had you go through and try to figure out how many different combinations. Maybe I did one time in class, had someone figure it out the manual way, going through and writing it out, and got it right. But I mean, they had so much work. And there's other things that do this. Like someone did this with Sonic drinks. Because Sonic, you could go and you could have this mix in and that mix in, and start with this, and then have this, and add this flavor. And they tried to figure out how many different possibilities. Now that got a little tricky because you could put so much of this and then change it to so much of that, and so really there's no set one for that. But there is a set number of different combinations you can have. The shortcut. So if you tried this and got frustrated and were like, "Man, this takes forever," is there, this was once you see this, you're gonna be like, "Oh, why didn't he start with that?" I think it's to show though how hard this could be if you didn't have the shortcut. But what you can do is total up how many different choices there are. There's two. There's three of these. There's two of these. There's four of these, and there's three shoes. Okay. That's how many different choices you have on each category. And no matter how many categories you have, you just total them up. Then you multiply them all. Okay, and that's going to be your combination. So 2 times 3 is 6, times 2 is 12, times 4 is 48, times 3 is 144, I believe. 48 times 3. Yeah, 144. So there's 144 different combinations, okay? So you just take the totals, multiply them, and that's how many different combinations you can have. So I thought I'd do that, show you that. Now, as far as today, what I want to cover is one more. There's another thing of statistics and things that's used in business and it's used in other places too, science, uh, your jobs as far as getting raised. That is called a percent of increase. Okay, percent of increase. Or I'm sorry, I'm sorry. So I didn't finish writing percent of change. I was looking at my increase decrease. Percent of change. I knew something in time. Percent of change. I apologize. Percent of change. So I changed that to change. Um, Percent of change because it can be increase or decrease. So um, this is called percent of change. And if you've ever heard, like in a business thing where they said, well, our business went up by 20%, or your raise is going to be a 3% raise, or he decreased his speed by 40%. Okay, that's called percent of change. It's giving you the percent of what you're changing things by. Okay, and I'm going to put an example up here. Let's say I was a business that sells canoes. I always go to canoes. I don't know why. It's been raining, so maybe that's why. 50, let's say I sold 50 canoes one day, and then the next day I sold 75. Okay, and so I went from selling 50 canoes to 75 canoes, and I wanted to know, well, how much did my business increase by percent? Uh, you know, did it, because then the next day, if I go to 150 and sell 150, you got to know how much percentage your business is growing so that you can plan, so that you can do those things. And so you can't just say, now, first off, I want to say this is not a 25% increase, okay? Just by going 50 to 70, you don't just take that and say, well, I increased by 25, so it's a 25% increase. That is not a percentage. You increased by 25 canoes, but that's not 25%. That was not 25% of 50. Um, so you have to be careful to say, because that'd be like saying, let's say you decrease to zero, the next day you decrease to zero. Well, that doesn't mean that you dropped by 50%. Okay, it means you dropped 100%. You sold 50 and then you went to nothing. You dropped 100%. Okay, so that's why you can't just take the numbers and put them as a number. Okay, and say, well, that's my number. So it's not just subtracting them. Okay, that would tell you how many more canoes you sold or how many less canoes, but that's not the percent of canoes that you sold less or more. Okay, so there's a formula for this that you are going to do that we'll talk about, that you'll use, that you can use going forward to figure this out, no matter how hard the numbers are or how easy. So first off, I started with this one on purpose because this one we can actually figure out without using the formula. Okay, if I sold 50 canoes one day, so what is, first off, without even looking at this, what is 100% of 50? Well, 50. Okay, 100% of 50 is 50. So if the next day I sold 100 canoes, that means I increased by 100%. Okay, I increased by 100% the next day. I sold 50, and then I sold that same 50 plus another 50. I increased by 100%. Well, what is half of 50? Okay, 25. Okay, half of 50 is 25. So 50%. 50, which if we wanted to find that out on the calculator, we would take 50 times 0.50, and it'd be 25. So to increase by 25 canoes means I increase by 50%. Okay, 50% is what I increase to get to 75. So that means, if I walked in and said, hey, I want you to do 50% better tomorrow, that means I want you to get 75. I think it makes a little more sense if we were looking at a raise. So let's say you were making $1,000 a week or something, and you are, it doesn't matter the time frame. If we wanted to be like, I guess probably more accurate, $1,000 every 2 weeks or $1,000 a month or something like that. But so the time frame doesn't matter. But let's say you are gonna increase, they're going to give you an increase of 3%. Okay, and so they say, hey, you got to raise however pay period, we're going to give you a 3% raise. Well, if they do that, that doesn't mean that you go to this. Okay, hey, now you get $3 more, every pay. Well, that's not a 3% increase. You pay. For one, you'd be like, wait a minute, you owe me more money if that's what you said you're going to give me. 3% of $1,000, okay, so we'll do this, 0, 0, 0, 3, move the decimal twice, is actually $30. You would get $30 every pay period of $1,000. So that's a lot better than this. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. You can't just take the difference between the two. So, like, say 1,000 to 1,003 and say, oh, I grew by 3, so that's 3%. That's my 3% increase. No, 3% of $1,000 is $30. So you actually, the next paycheck would get 1,030. So it makes a difference. You can't just say that and say, well, the difference is 25, so it's 25%. Okay, no, you've got to find the percent of change. How much did you change by? So, and so it does matter. It's a big difference, $27 between 3 and 30, $27 every paycheck is a lot of money. So let's look at this and say, well, how can I do it not being able to figure out, always the exact thing? Because they get harder. You could go from 36 to 50 and go, wait, what, I don't know the percent of each. So the formula for this is the amount of change. And that's not talking about change like coins. It's talking about how much did you change by over the original amount and you're going to set that equal to R over 100. I'll explain that in a second, but that's the formula. Amount of change over original amount equal to R over 100. Now, what that R over 100 is going to do is going to make this, at the very end, it's going to make it a percent. So this is not going to be one that when we're done, we got to move the decimal. This is going to turn it into a percent for us. Okay, so I'll do one, and we'll do this one, and you can see. Now, first off, the amount of change. This is not going to be a negative number. Okay, so depending on, here's what I mean. Let's say we do one where we decrease in a second. okay, 100 to 60, we are going to always subtract the smaller number from the bigger number. So we're not going to do 50 minus 75 and get negative 25. We're just going to subtract 75 minus 50 and get 25. Same thing with here. We're going to subtract 60 from 100 and get a positive 40. So we're always going to get a positive number here. Okay, so take the smaller from the bigger. So we did that on this one. Okay, we got 25. That was just taking 75 minus 50. That's how much we changed by. Okay, so there's where your 25 goes. Then you're going to put that over the original amount. The original one is always the first one before you change. So 50 in this case. Okay. Then you're going to set that equal to R over 100. Okay. And then going back to our ratios, if you had algebra and did ratios, or even if, I think we touched a little bit on it, all you're doing at this point to solve for R is to cross multiply. So 2500 equals 50R. So I did 25 times 100, and I did 50 times R. And now all you have to do is solve for R. And it's always, that's just where, I know it seems like, oh, that's a lot of algebra. It's going to be that same thing every time. So you will get used to that. But now all you have to do is divide by 50 to solve for R. And R, 2500 divided by 50 is 50, so 50 equals R. And see, those cancel out. So our percent of change, remember we said, was 50%. Okay? It was 50%. Okay, let's do that one where I decreased. Okay? Where I said I went from 100 to 60. Let's say I was traveling down the road at 100 miles per hour. Okay, not that I would ever do that. Maybe, no. Anyway, so I'm going 100 miles per hour, and we've all seen it before. So let's say I have a friend that's traveling 100 miles per hour. You're traveling by and say, man, they are flying, and all of a sudden up ahead you see, that special car that's got the little things on top, and you see everybody just slow down. Okay, so that person's going 100, that friend, and all of a sudden they slow to 60. Well, how much percent of change did they decrease? In this case, it was an increase. In this case, it's a decrease. How much did they decrease by? Well, first off, we could do this one probably in our heads if we think about it. First off, what's 10% of 100? 10% of 100 is 10. So if they slowed down, they slowed down 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. Now, this case, it's the same as just subtracting them, but that's because it's 100 to start out with. But, you could kind of do that one, but let's plug it into our formula. Okay, amount of change, 100 minus 60 is 40. The original amount was 100. Okay, so once you get that set, you go through the same process then at that point. So we changed by 40. The original amount was 100, equal to R over 100. And now we cross multiply. So that's going to be 4,000 equals 100R. And then we're going to divide both sides by the 100 to get rid of that. And we get 40 equals R. So 40% is what we changed by. Okay, let's do a couple more that are not ones that we could do in our head. So let's do one that's from 36 to 50. Okay, you went from 36 to 50. Okay, so that one, we don't necessarily probably know. We know we went up by 14, but what percent of that is that, So let's do our formula. First off, we're going to do 50 minus 36. That's going to be amount of my change. That's my 14. Over the original amount, which was 36, equals R over 100. Okay, so once you get those set, you've got your new problem every time. Now you just do the same thing every time. So now you're going to do 1400. That's that times that equals 36R. Okay, and when you divide 1400 by 36, which is what you need to do next, you end up getting 38.888. So it's going to be 38.9%, rounded to the nearest tenth. Remember, we're not moving the decimal twice anymore. This is already our percent. It's already put in percent. Okay? Let's do one more. Let's do a decrease one. Let's say, this is probably more accurate. Let's say you were going 72 miles per hour and you slowed down to 65. You saw that special car up ahead and you're like, oh, slow it down to 65. Okay? So the amount of change is 7. Okay, 72 minus 65 over the original amount equals R over 100. Okay, now you've cross multiplied. 700 equals 72R. And now I just need to divide by 72. And that point you get 9.7 rounded to the nearest tenth, and that's your percent. It's already in percent. You don't have to move the decimal twice. 9.7% of decrease. Okay? All right. I'm going to let you try these. Put a few up there. Number 1, 60 to 80. 57 to 97. 50 to 25. And 128 to 47. Okay? So give those a try. These increase, these decrease, but it's done the same way. And so I'll have you do those and tell me the percent of increase or decrease. Okay?